Okay. So first of all, here's the agenda for today. I'm going to do a quick intro, talk a little bit about what design is, so like the different roles that are available, share a little bit of work experience, and then talk about the current state of design in 2020. And then we're going to dive into preparing for design recruiting, so like portfolios and resumes, as well as interview tips. And then I'll share some resources, and we can do a Q&A at the end, but I'll also have question breaks in between. So if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we can see from there. And then if there are a lot of questions, we can answer them afterwards too. But before we start, maybe we could do like a hand raise. I just want to see, this is a smaller group, which is awesome, but who here like, well, first of all, who here like went to the first session? Because there is a part about resumes where I'm not sure if like I should speed through it or not. I think there's a hand raise option on Zoom, not sure, or a thumbs up kind of thing. Okay. Or, okay, I also want to see like who here is maybe like relatively newer to design. So I want to know if I should like speed through the about design portion. Okay, cool. Looks like, yeah, it looks like a decent amount of you are. And I also know from our survey last class that most people are coming from a non-design background. So, okay, I'll talk about that more. All right, first of all, hey, I'm Vicky. If you weren't at the first meeting, I am a senior at Duke right now, and I study computer science and psychology, and also a comp bio minor. These are some things I really like. So design systems, Figma is a design tool, really involved with hackathons and Hack Duke, and I love travel and coffee. And then I previously worked at Facebook this past summer, GSK, which is a pharma company last summer, Duke Cancer Institute, and the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So as you can see, there are a lot of, I have like a big health related background because I came into Duke set on being a biology major and pre-med, like I'm sure a lot of you may have come in or so. And the reason I wanted to mention this is, first of all, designers come from all sorts of backgrounds. Like you have like traditional science majors, liberal art majors, visual art backgrounds, music majors, like you name it, all sorts of backgrounds. And second of all, I wanted to just mention, like I used to think I wasted so much time when I was flip-flopping between career tracks, like not sure if I wanted to pursue pre-med or go down like software or design. But I don't think anything is really a waste of time because every little experience helps build you up. And as long as you're actively learning and like taking advantage of your situation, that's going to be really helpful. So like, for example, I was at a cancer lab one summer, and even though that's like nothing related to what I do now, a lot of I had like 2 hours of commute time and just at work, I had a lot of downtime. So I'd spend that time like listening to podcasts and reading Medium articles about design. So it's really just like making the best of your situation, and every little opportunity is a way to grow. Okay, so again, I'm going to spend a little more time talking about design because most people here are like relatively new to the idea. So a lot of you may have the preconception that you have to be artsy or creative or good at drawing in order to succeed in design. And this is absolutely not the case at all. Basically, like what makes design interesting and fresh, and the reason why I could see myself doing it down the road, is because it's fundamentally about problem solving. So product design has become an umbrella term that encompasses user experience, visual design, product thinking, fancy terms like information architecture and prototyping. But all that aside, at the core, product designers are focused on solving the user's problems. And this quote comes from, along with a lot of these ideas come from Stephanie Engel, who, if you don't know, she is a Duke alum and one of the first product designers at Duke. And she went on to do amazing things, designing at Airbnb, Facebook, and I think she's at Cruise now, which does automated cars. So she was saying, like, unlike art, aesthetics and design are not the only important thing, but they're rather a means to an end, which is problem solving. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about what else design is. So design is a balance of form and function. For example, most of you may think Tesla is just an electric car for the wealthy, but that's severely underestimating its design. At its core, the Tesla car is actually a solution to the problem of man-made pollution, and it's a vision for popularizing eco-consciousness and a healthier planet. So functional design enables people, but beauty and form signal respect and worth. So when you design a beautiful experience, that means you respect your users, and it's also a higher attention to craft because the visuals are usually the first thing a user notices. Design is also a vision. I'm sure many of you know what this picture is, but in case you don't, this is Steve Jobs back in 2007, basically introducing the iPhone, and he pitched it as your life in your pocket. Fun fact, that's actually the iPhone 3G in case you haven't seen it before. So design allows you to demonstrate a vision for what the world could be. The better and more precise the design, the easier it is to rally people to create that future. So the interesting thing about Apple design is that they usually know users better than the user knows themselves. So back when the iPhone first came out, a reporter actually complained that it was too hard to type on the touchscreen, to which Steve Jobs replied, "Your thumbs will learn." And then lastly, I wanted to say design affects everyone. So literally anyone can be a designer. It can both support our lives and in this example, impede our daily lives. We all have a general intuition of what's good design and what's bad design based off our own experiences. So this would not be a talk about design if I didn't pull up the famous door example. As you can see, why the heck do these doors look exactly the same except for the labels? A good design wouldn't require written labels. In fact, the push door should have push plates, which are appropriately named, which are like the metal plates that you see on a lot of doors. And because those only allow for pushing, there's no way to confuse someone whether you can pull or push them or not, because it's just obvious. And if any of you are on campus and you go to the second floor of West Union, those like glass rooms, you'll see what I'm talking about. Those doors always trip me up because you can like both push and pull on them, or like sometimes there's a restriction. I don't know, I get stuck a lot. Okay, but that's pretty much how I would describe what design is. Again, the emphasis is not on like drawing. It's definitely more on problem solving and paying attention to your users. So these are the typical roles you would see in job descriptions. First of all, UX stands for user experience, and this is pretty synonymous to interaction designers. So these designers are the ones who investigate behavioral patterns, and they may solve a pre-identified user need. And I say pre-identified here because they're not really concerned with speccing out the product itself. Like they don't have to make those product decisions. Those are usually left up to product designers or product managers. But UX and interaction designers are the ones who create and iterate on design solutions really fast. Next, we have UI, which stands for user interface. And UI and visual designers or graphic designers, although graphic designers is usually more on like the marketing, actual like artsy side of things, but sometimes they're all like referring to the same position. These are the people who do what everyone who isn't a designer thinks that all designers do. So they're really focused on the pixels, like the color, how things look basically. They work a lot with drawing tablets and Adobe Illustrator. And then lastly, product designers are kind of a combination of everything I just talked about, along with having business and prototyping skills. So the general consensus is compared to UX and UI designers, product designers have a wider range of skills as well as responsibilities. These are people who have to identify the business value behind every design decision they make. And I also want to point out that you should be a little wary about the term product designer when you're applying for things, because certain companies like Apple will list product designer, but they actually mean like physical hardware product designer. So they're looking for people with like ECE skills. Just be wary that like look at the job description and the responsibilities of that role and make sure it's not like hardware. Make sure it's like digital product design. I would also in general just like always read the job description and be aware of roles like marketing or social media, because a lot of companies who may not have like a mature design program or are purposely trying to fool you may write like this is a design role, but it's actually like a social media or marketing role. So just be careful about that. And next, these are some less typical roles in the design field, but I still wanted to mention them because they are really interesting. And these are all people that you may actually work with on your design teams. Or if your design team doesn't have these types of people, sometimes you're responsible for the work that they do. So user researchers are the ones who do like the research. So they'll conduct a lot of interviews with people. They ask real users the difficult questions, and they get all the answers you need in order to inform your own designs. So you're probably going to be working really closely with a user researcher or their work if you're going to do like an internship in design. So user researchers typically don't actually design that much. If you're interested in this role, you're going to be doing a lot of like reading and writing reports, but it's really cool because you do get to talk with real users. And if you're into that kind of stuff, I think it's a really exciting job. And then next, content strategists are pretty similar to UX writers. They both focus on like content and what's presented, but I will say UX writers have a larger emphasis on the text, or like what's known as copy. So this is like the exact words that are written on a design. Whereas content strategists may not just focus on words, they may focus on other content like pictures and such. And I haven't seen a lot of teams have these because generally a designer is responsible for content as well, but like LinkedIn in particular has a very strong UX writer role. And at Facebook, there's a huge group of content strategists. These people typically come from literature or English major backgrounds. And then lastly, this may be interesting to a lot of you if you're studying computer science as well as being interested in design, but a UX engineer is essentially the glue between design and engineering. So these people are bilingual in pixels and in pointers. They just have a really solid understanding of coding as well as strong advocacy for user experience in their code. They can also be called creative technologists, product design engineers, or design technologists. So I know at Google, it's called UX engineer, and at DoorDash, it's called design technologists. So if you're looking for these type of roles, make sure you search up all those keywords. Again, this isn't a really popular role, but here's like a diagram that better represents what a user experience engineer does. And I'll share these slides later, but you can read more about what like a day in the life of a UX engineer's job is like here. Okay, and now I just wanted to talk a little bit about like some of my personal opinions and experience after doing design for a couple of years. So first of all, like I said before, there's a common misconception that designers have to fit a specific mold or have to be like creative and have these certain set of skills, like I have to be good at Adobe or whatever. And I want to like debunk that myth, because you don't need to be super interested in fonts or like a creative cloud wizard or even have a degree in design in order to be highly effective. I will say I think the most important skills are empathy and having a growth mindset. So if you are already really strong in these, I think that's a very good indication that you'll be a great designer. But like no worries if you're not strong in these. Like I don't think I was very strong in these, but going through design and like doing design work, I think has definitely improved my skills in these. So when I say empathy, I think that really helps with understanding your users. You're gonna like understand where people are coming from, because you have to be aware that when you design, it's not always from your point of view, of course. And it also makes you a better teammate. Like as a designer, you're always working with tons of different people. Like you're working with researchers, engineers, product managers. Sometimes you're working with like business people or like branding teams. And it's really important to realize like if they don't get you something on time, or if they don't like build exactly what you have, it's not because like they're awful people and they hate you. Having empathy means like you're understanding where they're coming from. Like maybe they have certain situations, or maybe they see it this way. And overall, it just makes you a better team member. And then the other thing is having a growth mindset. Just really So first of all, like feedback is a huge gift, and you're constantly going to be iterating on other people's feedback. And if you're like stubborn and not willing to grow, that's going to be really hard for you in the future because your design isn't always right. Especially when you're doing like a critique during work. If someone is saying things about your design, it can feel like a personal attack on yourself because your design can kind of feel like your creative like baby, but you have to be aware like they're not trying to attack you. They're really just trying to help and have everyone create a better design together. And then also the second part of growth mindset is just always looking for opportunities, like saying yes to more things. Yeah, if you have empathy and a growth mindset, I think good designs and like visual sense will follow because both of these combined will just get you more experience and more practice. Okay, next, definitely work somewhere that values design and also work with people who value design. And when I say work, I mean like aim to work. When I first started, I literally took whatever I could get. I wasn't very picky with things, but it can really make a big difference in your like quality of experience. When I say like work somewhere that values design, there are definitely companies out there that are more design driven and more focused. For example, Airbnb, like their CEOs were previous designers, so they are a design first company, and design like drives all decisions there, and it's just a very pleasing place to work. And then when I say work with people who value design, make sure like you're not working with, for example, a lot of engineers might not listen to your decisions, or they might like make design decisions by themselves. And it's fine if you're like working together and collaborating and like discussing those opinions and working on something together. But if they're just overriding your opinions, that's not a really conducive work environment. Next. So there are like learning opportunities everywhere. I'm just going to talk a little bit about like my experience going from pre-med to design, but I personally started design with a Catalyst sweatshirt design, actually. That was fall semester. And one of the upperclassmen in Catalyst encouraged me to write a Medium article about the design itself. And I was like, okay, sure, like you're an upperclassman, I guess I'll listen to you. But that Medium article is really helpful because other Catalyst members read it and they gave me more opportunities for doing like logo designs for their friends or for their companies, and also contract work. So that was really useful. For example, Simran was working with Duke Cancer Institute at the time and they needed a designer. So I got some contract work with them. And then Gong was co-oping at Smart Car, I believe. So he brought me on for like a website design, and that was really helpful. So a lot of it is just seeking out opportunities or like saying yes. Again, just saying yes to opportunities, even if you think you don't have time. But also contract work is paid, which is a plus. But basically all of this built up my like portfolio at the time. And that is what, like those projects are what's going to enable you to go for an internship, I believe. And then also regarding startups, I actually was working with like RSpace, and I met the founder of that through a design house course that we both took. So working at a startup or like a small group teaches you how to work really fast, how to work on small teams, and in general, you're responsible for more work. So if you're looking to develop a lot of design skills really quickly, I would say work at like a startup. But regarding internships, I think an internship is the best way to figure out if design is what you want to do for your career. So at my internships, I learned the importance of like storytelling and presenting slides, also getting buy-in from cross-functional partners, because a lot of your day is just like meetings, to be honest. That's why at certain companies you have like focus blocks where, like for example, at Facebook on Wednesdays, we don't schedule meetings because people need to work. And then lastly, learning like responsibility towards users. I was going to talk a little bit about like the design internships and the timeline for that. So basically at GSK, we worked in 2-week sprints. I would like map out my tasks and we used Jira, and it was basically just like every 2 weeks we'd have like sprint planning together, or we'd have stand-ups every day. So if you're familiar with like agile methodology, that's basically what we did there. And then at Facebook for design, we took 1 week. The first week was like a design camp where we just learned, we had a, like, it was like going to school for design, which was really fun. And then the second week was starter tasks. And this helps you like ramp up on your team and use the same tools that your team does. And then the next 8 weeks, I worked on a main project. So going through the entire design process, like research, iterations, designs, meeting for feedback, prototyping, more research, handoff to engineers. And then my last week, we participated in a design sprint. So those were two very different structures of design internships, and I'm sure there are more out there, but those are the only ones I've had experience with. And then also at GSK, I was the only design intern there because they had a relatively new tech team, whereas at Facebook, there were like 60 other design interns. So I was constantly feeling intimidated and imposter syndrome, but I was definitely inspired by all the other interns. Yeah, so this last point, imposter syndrome and valuing yourself, I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory. Like everyone's on their own path, so it's really not in your best interest to compare yourself with where others are, and just like value your own work. Like when I first started, like Smart Car with Gong, I literally said like $10 an hour was fine, but looking back on it, it's probably not fine. Okay. This last slide, I just wanted to talk about the state of design recruiting now in 2020. So this mostly applies to new grads. Like the article I read, the person was mainly talking about new grads, but I think it definitely affects internships as well. Definitely like even when I first started design, like 2 or 3 years ago, there weren't that many people interested, but nowadays the UX field is like really hot. People think there's like great pay, great work-life balance, relatively low barrier of entry. And people think like if you start now, you'll be working at a top tech company in the Bay Area in like 1 or 2 years. But this isn't really true anymore. Like the golden age of design is over. Like top tier companies can afford to be highly selective. And it's kind of just a supply and demand problem. So even though there are non-traditional companies and like, for example, banks like Capital One and Bank of America, who have recently started to hire really aggressively for designers. Like even though there are more companies hiring for more designers, there's the number of candidates is just outpacing that demand right now. And like this diagram, I don't think the author was, the author isn't trying to put down companies like Intuit and PayPal. Actually, Intuit is really good at design, by the way. Like they're a design first company. But he's just trying to say like companies with more mature design teams like Google and Facebook are going to be more selective now. I will say like by more mature, I think he just means like companies that are design first or are just like larger and older. So like Airbnb, Apple, Google, Facebook, are really great at design, but also like Instacart, Intuit, IBM, Spotify. I don't know any more off the top of my head, but there are like tons of companies out there that are either already design first or shifting to design first. Yeah, but if you do want to continue and recruit for design in 2020, the things you're gonna need are a good portfolio and a good interview, which is what we're gonna cover next. But before we move on, I just wanted to pause for any questions you may have on like what design is and roles in design. Feel free to chat it later, but if no one has questions, I'm just going to move on to the actual recruiting tips and such. Sorry, Michelle, I muted you. Okay, I'm just gonna move on then. So first of all, portfolios and resumes. I'm not going to spend too much time on resumes because we did cover that in our class last Thursday. So if you weren't there, feel free to check out the video, which is posted on our YouTube channel. Oh, whoops. But for resumes, I'm just going to share a few changes you might make if you're applying for design positions. So the first one, or overall, just be intentional. Like only keep things on your resume that actually matter to you and kind of represent what you want to work on in the future, because like I said before, if you're putting things on there that you don't want to work with, like recruiters are going to see it and be like, oh, they know how to do this, I'm going to like put them on this team. So just be intentional with what you keep on there. The most important difference, I think, is a design resume will have a link to your personal website or your portfolio somewhere, because portfolios are honestly more important than your resume when it comes to applying for design positions. Another thing is regarding education, because Duke doesn't have specific design programs like HCI or graphic design or whatever, like some other colleges may, I think it's valuable to put relevant courses under education, because it can show like, yeah, like maybe I don't major in it like other students do, but here are some courses that I take that like qualify me for this position. I used to have relevant courses like when I was a sophomore and junior, but I feel like I have an experience now as a senior, so that's why I took it off. But relevant courses I used to have were things like the HCI house course that was taught, social psychology. I also put data science and I also put data structures and algorithms and everything data on there. But at the time, I was also applying for software roles. In the next, on your skills portion, you're going to want to highlight your design tools first. The reason I have development there is because this is an old version of my resume. And again, I was applying for software also at the time, but I will fix that. But design tools and skills that you, I think, absolutely need to have on your resume are going to be either Figma or Sketch, because all companies pretty much use either Figma or Sketch to design. So definitely have one of those. I personally recommend Figma because it's like accessible to everyone, whereas Sketch is only available to Mac users. And then you also need some sort of prototyping tool. You don't need all of these, but prototyping tools include Origami, InVision, Framer, Proton. Figma is also a prototyping tool, but definitely like have one of those on there, and then some sort of Adobe tool, because if you know one, that means like you've learned all the like buttons and stuff for one, which means you're able to learn the buttons for the others. Not that they're in any way similar, but they're all hard. So it shows that you can learn them. But I would definitely recommend having an Adobe tool on there. Another thing is design resumes are probably going to have to be pretty. Like you don't want to do the text and like a couple lines, kind of the black and white resume that you typically see, just because like recruiters are going to be seeing a bunch of really pretty resumes, so you also want yours to be like pretty. So I would use hierarchy there and just like reference good designs or like resumes that you do like to make your own. And then a key difference is your impact may not necessarily be in numbers, because like let's say at an internship, the timeline is that you're going to finish your design by the end of your internship. So there's no way that it will be shipped or built. So you may not have numbers like, or like even impact like it was built, or like 10 people use this. 10 is not a good number, sorry. Like 40 people use this. That's all, you know what I mean? But again, there are other ways that you can show impact. For example, like designers, you're usually going to show impact with like, if it was built, saying that like it was actually built and now it's used by however many people. Also like maybe how many screens you designed for, or one thing from this previous summer I would say is like my designs are referenced by my team members in their own work. Like they share it out and they like reference it to build upon. So that's all impact, and it's not necessarily numbers based. Okay, that's all I'm going to cover about resumes, but now we're going to move on to a portfolio, which is the more important part. So your portfolio format can be a website, a PDF, slides, printed out. I would recommend a website though, because that is the most common and it's the easiest to update. And then a really common question that I get is whether you should code it or not. But I would say like, unless you want to code at your job, so unless you're going for a UX engineer role or like a front end role, or if that's something you're really proud of, like you're boasting that like, oh, I'm like going to be a great designer because I'm good at coding too, then you should probably code your portfolio's website. Otherwise, you don't need to. Prioritize making it user-friendly first. So prioritize like showcasing your work and writing it correctly and like clearly showcasing your personality as well. So you don't have to worry about like actually implementing it, but worry more about like what it says. So if you're going to like last year I was going for software roles, so I did code it, but this year I'm redesigning it and I'm using Webflow. But other tools you can use are Wix or Squarespace. but all of these will require a little bit of payment for like, I think monthly. So those aren't free, but if you code it yourself, it is free if you use like GitHub hosting. You will have to buy a domain, but GitHub also has a free domain you can use. And if you are aiming to code it yourself, you have to know HTML and CSS. And a great resource to learn that if you don't is internetingisHard.com. They just have really, really great graphics. So if you just want to learn those languages too, I would use that resource. I actually used to teach a workshop with my Catalyst Big on how to code your own portfolio site. So if any of you are interested in coding your own, I can send you those slides later. Just message me or something. But, oh, I forgot to mention, a good portfolio encompasses all three of these. And it makes it's really difficult because you have to do all three of these well. So first of all, UX methodology is kind of just demonstrating that you know what the UX design process is and that you use it in your own design process. So these include things like user research, conducting surveys and interviews. These could be like Google Forms that you send out to get more data. User research synthesis, like constructing personas, doing journey maps, user flows, affinity diagrams. These are all like very technical terms, but there are so many Medium articles out there that you can just reference, like, how do I build a user persona? And there's like so many great results. So I would definitely recommend searching on Medium if you're looking to use one of these in your design process and you don't know where to start. Another one, and a really important one for if you're going for a product design position, not like UI design per se, is problem space definition. So being able to identify people problems and defining like guiding principles and like being able to write a design brief and identify success is going to be really important when you're setting up your like problem space. And these are things that like, if you were a UI or UX designer, it might be like spec'd out already by a product manager. So that's why like if you're going for a product design position, it's important to include these things on your portfolio. And then lastly, wireframes and prototypes. So this is like the screens and like the interaction between the screens. And these can be low fidelity or high fidelity. Low fidelity would be things like just using pen and paper drawings, or like only using boxes instead of like the actual images or like the actual text. High fidelity would be like basically what the app would look like when it's done, but it's not like coded and out there. In some cases, if you're really strong at coding, you can also code your prototypes, but most people will use design tools like Figma, InVision, Origami to do their prototypes. Right, the next big thing that you'll need to demonstrate on your portfolio is product thinking. And there is an increased importance of this in 2020. So product thinking is basically a reality check of your project's ideas. Someone said like a project with rosy assumptions but no consideration of real life constraints are considered lacking in product thinking. So some questions to ask when you're like designing is, what's the competitive landscape? Basically like, what are other apps or companies out there that do a similar thing? And like, what edge do they have? Or like, what are they lacking? Or what do they do well? Basically like, what am I solving? Like if it's already out there, like, why am I doing this? Another question is like, what are logical reasons why a user will use my product? And then a really important one is, how does it fit into the existing ecosystem? So if you're building a new feature idea, if you're designing a new feature, like how does it fit into the entire app as a whole? Or if you're building a new app, how does it fit into like the entire space? So if you're building like a new crowdsourcing app, how does it fit into other crowdsourcing apps? Like how can we leverage user behavior when it comes to crowdsourcing? And regarding product thinking, you're not expected to have like a fully decked out strategy with metrics and goals, but you do want to demonstrate a realistic strategy and demonstrate that you understand the surrounding ecosystem. So the last thing is visual design. I know I said like you don't need to be good at drawing, but there is an increased importance of visual design in 2020 as well. And this refers to like things like type, color, white space, and all of these things, you want them to be on par with industry standards, which are always changing. Like in recent years, a lot of apps have shifted to increased white space, for example. But growing an eye for this takes time and practice. in order to practice, you could go to dribbble.com and just pick out a few designs you really like and then practice by like copying out those patterns. And this will also help not only build up your visual sense, but also help build your skill in whatever tool you're using, right? So you'll quickly notice that it's like tiny things like type hierarchies or like opacity, rounding corners and white spaces. Like all of these little things will collectively build up a beautiful UI. And it's really likely that you've just overlooked these things before, but like once you practice more and develop a sense for it, it'll just be like inherent, and things that you design moving forward will have all these already. So for some like actionable things, I would just go to Dribbble and like practice copying. Yeah, here's an example of like improved visual design. So on the left, we have Airbnb from 2011, and on the right, we have Airbnb today. One of their main concerns back then was travelers are not booking rooms on Airbnb because they don't trust the listings. So they think that travelers will trust listings more if we improve the visual experience for listings and better equip hosts to showcase their rooms. So actually after this, they hired a team of photographers to take photos for some of the listings, and this dramatically improved a lot of their booking rates. But another thing regarding visual design that we see here is they made photos dramatically larger and like clearer for people to see. And then also they added things that indicate social proof. So things like the superhost tag, or here are the reviews, like this is how high the review is, and this is how many people reviewed it. So adding these things and like de-emphasizing price, which is something that users will worry about, like they have to worry about anyways. But like adding social proof there is what really drove their bookings up. Okay, before I go on to interviews, are there any questions about resumes or portfolios that I can help answer?
We had one question from Rachel, but you may have answered it along the way. Rachel, I don't know if you want to ask that question.
I can see it.
Okay.
So the question was, I'm not sure if you mentioned this earlier, but which design role did you have for your internships? So for GSK last summer, so there were only 6 tech interns in general, and we were all considered IT platform interns, but with different roles. So my role was product design. So on LinkedIn, I just listed it as product design, and like in parentheses, I think I have like IT, whatever. But at Facebook, it was product design. So at different companies, you'll have like different descriptions, and it might correspond to different roles you may have. But for the most part, internships are all pretty much the same when it comes to design roles. So like if you see UX versus product, I don't think you're really responsible for that much of a difference in between the roles, at least for an internship. Oh, thanks, Dorian, for dropping the link. Yeah, it's a really good resource. Okay, I'm gonna move on to I'm gonna move on to interviews, but if any other questions come up, feel free to drop it in the chat. Right, so first of all, these are just some general tips. There are like many types of design interviews you may come across, but I just want to share some general tips that apply to all of them first. The biggest one is practice makes perfect, like practice out loud. And what's really helpful for me is to like physically write out my answers and like record myself and listen to myself talk. But it's better if you can like find someone else to discuss. Like if someone else is recruiting for design, that could be really helpful because you could give each other pointers. But first of all, coherent storytelling is really, really important, especially in phone screenings, I'll say, because the interviewers, first of all, have never met you. They've never seen your project before. So it's really important to explain the background story to your project and like why you think the problem space is worth tackling. I failed my Facebook design interview last year because I could not answer the question, what is the problem you're solving? So it's really important to be prepared and have a good story. Secondly, like this high level of confidence comes from the task that like you need to defend decisions in meetings, like at your actual job, and even in your internship. Like I had to defend a lot of design decisions I made with different types of people. It's not always designers who you're talking to. like you have to defend certain decisions to your engineers and to your PMs. So you have to be confident in your designs. And this kind of leads into the second point of having a design rationale for everything. So especially during your interviews, like your interviewers will literally ask for design reasonings from like anywhere on your wireframe. I have gotten questions like, why did you choose to use a hamburger menu instead of a traditional tab bar for your navigation? Or like, why did you use this font weight here? So like really specific things, honestly. And if you can't answer these like these decision questions, that's kind of a red flag. So to prepare for this, something actionable is like go through any designs you may be presenting one by one and make sure like you have some sort of rationale for every element that you see on there. Thirdly, behavioral questions. Again, these are going to be like, you have to prepare for these ahead of time. Typically, they're things like how you handle conflict. If you've ever disagreed with a major decision, if you've worked with an engineer before, and what kind of teammate you are. And for all behavioral questions, I would say using the STAR method is really valuable. So the STAR method refers to like, you can search it up, but it's like a pretty popular method for kind of answering with like a story almost. So S stands for situation, T stands for task, A stands for action, and R stands for result. So it kind of like brings you through that story. And like definitely practice these stories and like these answers to behaviorals beforehand. Sorry, I need water. Okay. And then the last thing is likability. So a lot of the times, especially if the company's design program isn't big, your interviewers are gonna be like designers that you might actually be working with in the future. So you definitely want to be likable because they want to see if you're someone that they want to work with for the summer or like for many years if you're like applying for a full-time job. In general, just like don't be cocky and don't be overconfident. Like, yes, it's important to be confident, but make sure you have like technical reasons to back that up. Don't be cocky and just like be a good person. I don't know how to explain that anymore. Just like don't be awful. All right, so these are the types of design interviews you might come across. I haven't done a whole lot of these actually, but I will talk about my experience and like, I think tips for each one, however much I can. For a phone screening, this is usually behavioral, so use the STAR method, and it's usually like the first step in any design interview process, and it's also usually done by a recruiter, so not an actual designer. So in this case, you really want to define your problem clearly because they may not know like all the design terms you're using, right? It's more important to define like the problem and like how you solved it rather than all these like fancy terms in the middle. And then another tip for phone screenings, definitely practice those, record yourself, and like make sure you have some sort of intonation because it can be really easy to like sound flat. Like also during this whole talk, I'm sure I sounded kind of flat at points. I should have practiced that beforehand. Next, there is a portfolio review. So these are generally like towards the end of the design interview phase. So make sure you have like 2 to 3 good solid projects in your portfolio because most of these interviews last around 45 to 1 hour, 45 minutes to 1 hour. So that's enough time to go through like 2 or 3 projects. Sometimes they're on site, although I doubt in like this semester or next semester things will be on site. But in general, for portfolio walkthroughs, focus more on the problem and your final design solution because your interviewer in like the final rounds are likely going to be actual designers themselves. So they already know the design process. Like you don't need to explain it to them. They just want to see that you know it too and that you can do it too. So I would recommend like spending 30% of your time defining the background and the problem and setting context. And then like, okay, wait, 30 is not right, like 40. And then like maybe 20% of the time, just like going through slides where you can have screenshots of like, here are my wireframes, like here are the results from like some research I did, but you don't have to explain like, this is what research is, right? And then the last 40% walking through your final design solution. And when you're walking through it, talk about like why you chose this, or like why you did this, and like how does this tie back to the problem you were solving, and like how does this tie in with your users. Again, it's all about like good storytelling, right? And then with an app critique, this isn't too popular with a lot of companies, but I do know a couple who do them, like Facebook does it, and what's it called? Cisco does it. So with an app critique, the way to practice is just like practice with all apps and practice it frequently. So if you're ever using an app, just like app critique it. And you want to do this verbally because it's way easier to think about things in your head, but when you're actually like articulating it out loud, it may not come out the way you want it to. Definitely for app critiques, it will also usually be a designer who's evaluating you on this, and they just want to see like you can make decisions about designs and that you have things to back it up. So for app critiques, they usually ask about like Google apps, Yelp, Instagram, Messenger, Spotify and Apple Music, Uber and Lyft. I think those are the main ones. And if you're interviewing for a company, they won't ask you to critique their own app. So don't worry about preparing for those. And then lastly, there is a design challenge. So this could either be take home or like an hour right there. It will probably also be a designer who's evaluating you for these. And for any type of design challenge, Medium articles are your best friend. Like just gaining experience and like knowing how to design, again, defending your decisions is going to help you a lot. It's better if it's take home because you have more time to like refine it, and you can like refer to articles out there on like how to complete them. But if it's like 1 hour in person, just be calm and like if you got to a design challenge, you're probably qualified. So just be confident in yourself. Okay, yeah, and that's all I have for interviews. So I'm gonna see if there's any more questions regarding that. And if not, we'll just move on to the last section, which is like quick resources. Oh. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Sounds good. Oh, just kidding. Did you learn technical skills mostly through your internships and work experience, or through Catalyst, do classes, and other things? Yeah, that's a really good question. I will say, I think more outside of internships and work experience. So especially because like, I'm assuming most of you are Duke students, like we don't have design classes or design programs per se. A lot of designers at Duke just do like side projects, and again, taking on any opportunities you can, whether that's through class things or through friends of friends or through like club stuff. That's where you're going to build up the most experience. And if you don't have those things, just doing your own case studies is going to help you build experience. So if you like search how do you do a case study or like something of the same nature, that's just going to help you. I do think internships and work experience are really helpful in determining whether you want to do that for your job. And then also like you learn more of the soft skills part, like working with others and like sharing your work and like participating in meetings. Yeah, I will say a lot of technical skills are built up like on your own, because in order to get internship, like you probably have all of those technical skills because you have like case studies in your portfolio. I'm going to move on, but that was good. It led us into like the next portion kind of. So some takeaways, things you can do now and like things at Duke that you can do. First of all, tools for designing. I get a lot of inspiration from Dribbble, Behance, Product Hunt, and Medium, like especially when I'm starting out or like I'm absolutely clueless with how to solve like a design problem. I'll just like go on one of these sites and search whatever I need to search and like get inspiration, do like a mood board, just like drop the photos somewhere so I can like see it all up there. For actually building the designs, I would use Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD. This is older, but some companies still use Balsamic. I've never used it, so I can't really say much about it. And then pen and paper is also your best friend. And then lastly, for prototyping, so prototyping is like making things move, kind of like the interactions, like, oh, if I click on this screen, how does it get to like what shows, like what's on the other screen? Again, Figma can prototype, InVision, Origami, Proton, and then these are more code related, but Framer is like a design prototyping tool, but it's like geared towards people from a coding background. And then you can also just use HTML and CSS if you're comfortable with that. For learning, these are some really great books that are just, they definitely focus more on like problem solving rather than design hard skills and like technical skills. And a lot of them are also like touching upon psychology. Online, so a couple of Duke designers actually created this design handbook. So again, I'll share these slides later, but there's some really good resources here for like more details on how to make your portfolio or like things that you should follow, and also like recruiting and stuff. You can also listen to some great podcasts like Design Details, subscribe to newsletters to get updates and just like keep updated with the design community. And then at Duke, a lot of the designers, I don't know if it's the case now, but like when I first started, a lot of the designers at Duke were segregated into like a couple groups, especially like Hack Duke and Catalyst. So those are motivations for like joining those groups. But there's also design communities like DITA and Design for America and Duke INE. And then Campus Enterprises is really interesting because they're like focused on campus businesses. So there's always a need for designers to create their like websites and other like tech tools per se. But I will say for Campus Enterprises, they only recruit like if you're a freshman, and it's like a 4-year kind of thing. So I do regret not applying when I was a freshman. So if you are a freshman, I would look into that. And then some classes you can take. Again, Duke doesn't have any design classes, but these are the ones that are like relatively helpful. And another thing I want to point out is like not a lot of schools have design programs. So most designers come from, like in 2020 at least, they come from the following majors: graphic design, visual design, whatever, HCI. So those are like actual design majors, but a big chunk of them also come from computer science and psychology. So for example, I think social psych is a really valuable class. It was like one of my favorite classes at Duke. For comp sci, intro to mobile programming. So you will have to like code the mobile app, but you also get to design it. And then there's an ECE class called human-centered computing. And then there's a lot of like VMS or arts viz classes. Experimental interface design is really, really great, but it's also like small, so it's hard to get into. Graphic design and multimedia isn't offered every year, but I heard really great things about that as well. And then I don't think motion design has been offered very recently, but I guess it's on there. And then lastly, these are just some good job boards for recruiting. So instead of like hunting through Google, you can go to interns.design or cofolios.com/jobs. And this is where it's like frequently updated job boards for only design positions, which is really, really helpful. So I would say like if you're done applying for all of those, then you can go to LinkedIn or Glassdoor to look up like other design roles you may want to apply to. And then I wanted to mention these programs at the bottom. So this is like it's not a traditional co-op or an internship experience, but many of these are like VC firms. So these venture capitalist firms have like a portfolio of other companies. For example, KPCB, their portfolio includes like Instacart, DoorDash, Uber, Airbnb, I think. But basically, if you're accepted as a fellow in that cohort, which is yearly, you'll be assigned to be like a design fellow at one of their portfolio companies. And these are also really cool because they hold like fellowship events together. So you get to like talk with people who are doing similar jobs, but like working at other companies. And for like KPCB, it's not just design fellows, they also have PM fellows and software fellows. I do know Akshara was a KPCB engineer fellow, so you can ask her more about that. And there's a lot of Duke students who are freestyle fellows. I've also heard really, really good reviews on that. So definitely look into that when it comes out. And that's the end of the presentation. Wow, exactly an hour. Okay. Thank you. If there's any questions now, I can help answer, but if something comes up later, or if you wanted to ask a question about the slides, feel free to just email me at vicky.lu@duke.edu.